Welcome to the Estates Made Simple podcast with Jenna Carvello and Gordon Vanderleek. We are on a mission to simplify the world of estate administration, helping executors gain the knowledge required to manage an estate. Please note, the following is for informational purposes only and is not to be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. We recommend you seek individualized advice for your unique situation with qualified professionals.
Good morning and good afternoon to all of our listeners here. We're excited for another captivating estate administration discussion. Gord and I thank you for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
We'll jump right in. Today we wanted to talk about what we could tell the people that have executed new wills and then have later passed away if we could go back in time. So standing in the shoes as an executor or perhaps just an advisor to these individuals that have since passed away, what would we say to them if we could? Between the two of us, I'm sure we've managed hundreds of estates, and these are some common things that arise during the course of an administration that we want people to know and be well aware of when they're planning their own estate. So the first thing I would ask you, Gord, what thing would you go back and tell a testator before, and if you could?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the perspective on this, because really what struck me about this topic would be, like in my world, is okay, let's get the legal documents in place. And then, okay, for a lot of people, they may say, oh, my will's up to date, all that stuff. I got all that done, so I'm done. But what we see on the estate administration side is sometimes some of the softer issues or beyond the core of legal documents that would be helpful or make an estate go smoothly. So it's a great topic. I think what I see as making a huge difference is how organized the person was in their lifetime, right? So, and this again is beyond doing the legal documents, but what about, is there good organization with regard to everything is there? The reality is that we just accumulate more stuff, maybe compared to our parents. Our lives are a little more complicated. And so we definitely don't want to leave a mess for the executor, and we want it to be organized as best it can be. There's obviously a certain amount of detail that just the executor has to sort out, but there's a lot that can be done. And that would be my first thing, is the tip to the person before they passed away is to say, get your affairs organized, get everything together that would be important. And hopefully by listening to some of these episodes, you get a sense of these are the things that would be helpful to organize. But even if you just approach it from often we'll say, apply the golden rule, or pretend you're somebody's executor. What would you expect to see if you went into their filing cabinet in the office at home after the funeral? What are you hoping is there? And if you think it from that perspective, you go, yeah, I'd want a listing of assets. What's out there? Is there a list of all the credit cards? I guess you could fumble through the person's wallet and watch for the mail coming in to figure these things out. But wouldn't it be nicely organized? If it was nicely organized, that you would have that information readily available. You could immediately start contacting people versus just, I don't even know what's out there. What do they own? What do they owe? Having an updated list of that would be helpful. It may not be right up to the day of death, but if there was one done 3 months ago, 6 months ago, that's going to be an enormous help compared to there's nothing there and you have to do like this forensic accounting to try to figure out everything that's there. So you'd want to make sure your tax returns are all filed, would be another simple example to say, I think most of us know we have to do that, but if you're behind, sometimes that happens for life circumstances, you fall behind on that stuff. Just get it organized. I would say to the person, don't leave that for your executor to do, because for them to try to find all the tax slips and to figure all that out is a tremendous amount of work, which is just going to add to the delay on the estate and the costs of the executor. If they're putting more time in, that's going to increase the amount they're going to claim for compensation for all that time. You're actually being fiscally prudent by following the steps to get all this stuff organized. The other thing that I find where there's a delay between when I do an intake on the estate administration and when I'm ready to file the probate application is just getting the list of all the people that are listed in the will. If there's, to divide between my nieces and nephews. Okay, if there's 16 nieces and nephews, you need all their contact information. Would it be helpful if that was available? You had it all listed so you knew where to get a hold of these people. And if I had that meeting with the client asking, because I'll ask for that information, I ask for it every time. I said, here's the beneficiaries. I don't know these people. You got to go find them and get all this information. If I made the ask and everything is organized, then I probably have that the next day and can move
Right.
forward on drafting the probate application versus it's going to take 2 weeks. So you're just making it easier on the executor by being organized is the general theme. And if you think about what would I want if I was, that person's executor, well, do that for yourself, right? If you go, this would be basic information. Those would be some of the main ones where all the important legal documents are. The tax information is so critical. Then you have that a list of all your assets and liabilities and who are the important people that are referenced in the will who are going to have to receive notice. Make it easy for your executor. Even if you do those first of those, just a couple of those items, that is a huge gift to the executor and you're saving them a significant amount of time. So to the extent you would want to be given that gift, do unto others thing, right? That you would say that's a great thing to do for the person who you've named as the executor.
This brings up a memory for me is when I was involved in estate administration and was acting as an executor. We manage an estate of a gentleman who was a hoarder. And so you could imagine going into the home, everything is all over the place, piles of papers, piles of assets, just sitting on the counter and things like that. So that obviously took a lot more time and it took a lot more cost. And that was obviously an extreme example, but don't leave your affairs like that, I would say.
Exactly. A lot of people, I had a meeting yesterday with a client. We were reviewing their estate plan, and to her credit, their credit, she goes, I've got this 3-ring binder. She was a little old school. It's not like in the cloud, but 3-ring binder. And she got the information, a checklist from a funeral home, and she was going through and filling that all in. And I thought their executor is gonna be thankful that amount of work was done, right? Because she has all the information. The other part of this first point would be if all that information is in your head, oh, I know all that stuff, that goes with you. And especially if somebody passes away unexpectedly, all that knowledge goes with you. So document it, organize it, let them know where it is just gets the estate off to a good start.
And if I could go back in time, Gord, I would tell a lot of individuals to talk to their family before they pass about their plans with respect to their estate. I don't know how many families I've worked with that are surprised at their mom or dad's plans, or surprised that they're appointed as an executor, surprised that the estate is distributed like this. And it causes so many unanswered questions, often hurt feelings, and can also lead to disputes and litigation in the estate administration. So my number one thing and tip to clients is to, express your plans to your family, have that open and honest conversation, because then it highlights any issues that may arise in the future. You can deal with it then and there. You can have plans to decide if it's still an appropriate estate distribution plan. Otherwise, you're leaving it to chance. And if you're passed away, your family's left to deal with it alone. So I really like this suggestion and tell a lot of people to do this.
I think it makes a big difference. I really appreciate this point because to the extent there's going to be discomfort about the decisions, I think it's much more powerful for, let's use a typical family situation, for the kids to have heard it from mom and dad.
Yes. I agree.
Versus if one of the kids or another family member is the one appointed, it almost feels that's their decision or that's wrong. Okay, it's the person's will. They get to make the decision about how to distribute the assets, but you could, I think, calm a lot of discontent if you just have that conversation and explain, this is the way I want it done, and they know it. People tend to call lawyers when there's a missed expectation, right? And when somebody passes away, they're expecting one thing and they got something different. But if people are getting exactly what they expected, they're not calling lawyers. So I think just manage that communication can diffuse what could be getting the estate off to a contentious start. And at the end of the day, using the example of parents and children, it's the parents' decision. And they could just say, this is what we've decided. And I would hope you can accept that. I think it's pretty powerful hearing that from a parent versus grumbling about it afterwards. Right. And saying, I don't think that's right. And I'm going to challenge it. Or maybe there's a window to make life more difficult because they have hurt feelings. But I also appreciate what you're saying is there's an emotional component to this as well, beyond the strict legal or the fundamentals of estate administration. If you set up your estate in a way, even with the administration going as smoothly as it can, with people not talking to each other or being upset, that's not a great legacy to leave either, right? That you want your kids to get along afterwards. And when in that context, or your family to think positively and not have that emotional baggage of, why wasn't I included? Or why wasn't I named as an executor? If you heard the answer in your lifetime or in your parents' lifetime about why the choice was, you go, oh yeah, I wish I was the executor, but I understand why they made that decision. I think those are two very different scenarios. And as you say, I just want to emphasize that emotional toil. You don't want to have that as your gift as part of your estate plan, is to say you're burdening them with some of this stuff where it could easily have been avoided with good communication. I think in some cases you have to judge. I've seen scenarios where people over communicate and you create issues in your lifetime because you raise things that maybe you shouldn't have. So every family situation is different, but it's a good starting point to be able to say that typically more communication is better than less. And for whatever reason, let's just be candid and say this whole topic about what happens in the estate and what happens on your death or your disability, these are difficult conversations. And a lot of people tend to put it off or going, it's an awkward conversation. I don't want to bring that up. My kids will be upset. Again, consider what you're going to communicate, but just being open about it, because it's going to happen, and better to take control of it than it feels I've done the best I can in the circumstances, right? And you don't leave it as a bit of a mess. So I think that, yeah, I really appreciate your comment about sharing those plans with your family. It doesn't mean they need to know the amount in your bank or the details, but it's probably helpful to know the big picture. And especially if there's a decision that you think might be contentious, that it would be good to talk about it. And I guess sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I've worked with an executor executrix, I should say, that she said, if I could go back in time and tell my mom one thing, is I would tell her not to appoint me, because she had to do a lot of estate administration over several years and she wished she was never appointed. So that's another discussion item, is ensure that your executor is well equipped and willing to take on the role.
Yeah. Well, to have that communication, I think if you do some of the things we've been talking about, especially that first point, if you're going to somebody and say, will you be an executor? I think you can say to them, and I have everything organized.
Yeah.
Will help get to a yes. If you lay it out as clearly as possible and lessen that burden, because it's a lot of work. I think every single executor, is almost a truism to say, the executor at the end of it will always say, that was a lot more work than I anticipated.
Yes.
I have yet to meet an executor who goes, oh, that was a lot simpler than I thought. No, it's always the opposite. It's always more work. And sometimes to the point of people saying, I wish I was never appointed. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story. And talking about, I guess, one last area to wrap it up, and where I see there's potentially some contention, which the disputes in what we're going to talk about is not related to the value of the items potentially in dispute, and that would be the household items or personal effects. We're all going to pass away with stuff. Malls exist for us to go in and buy stuff. And so we're going to die with stuff. And the reality is some of that stuff has emotional components to it. And it would be important to have a plan for how that is distributed. In some cases, you'll see a very detailed plan in the will, but more often than not, it's really at the discretion of the executor to come up with a plan as to how to divide those personal items. But just take it as a given, even if you don't attach a lot of emotion to items, like physical items, there's probably somebody in your family that does. And one of your siblings in a situation where we're thinking about mom and dad having passed away. So you have to be sensitive on how you deal with that. Or if somebody goes, no, I want that, I want it. And it may be a silly item that's a piece of costume jewelry, but they'll sit and fight about it. And sometimes these items end up in court, which becomes even more ridiculous, right? To say you're spending good money with lawyers to fight about stuff that's not worth any of that, or doesn't have the value of what you're actually spending. But because there's a lot of emotional attachment to it, I think it really highlights, I would like to go back and say to people, don't just assume your kids will get along and figure out how to divide all those personal items. Come up with a plan. Talk to your family about it. I think this ties to the communication to say who wants what. And if you sense there's going to be a dispute, we'll deal with it up front. You could take control because it's your stuff. right?
Yeah.
There's such an opportunity to do that in your lifetime, to have everything go smoothly, or have a list, say, be clear on your wishes and your instructions, which could include the opinion of your kids or whoever's going to receive them. I would add to this, where I see this particularly become contentious, is in blended families, right? The household items represent different families of origin on a blended family. And so what happens? How does that get divided up? Somebody goes, this reminds me of my late mother. Dad got remarried. Is this going to step brothers and sisters, and it should go back to them? And there's so every family situation is different. You have to judge what could be contentious, but this is an item where there could be contention. So I think if you go back and say, let's put a plan in place, be clear, take control of it, that's going to be a huge gift to the executor, because it's otherwise a very difficult thing to try to resolve these sorts of issues. And if done poorly, can result in family members not talking to each other. And it's just really important to set out some rules, right? And you get to do that in your lifetime. If you don't, you hope the kids get along and dividing everything up, but that's not a given, right? You don't want to leave that open, because what if it isn't? That's not the way you want to start off the administration. So you could include specific items, but a lot of times people will have a separate letter of wishes that they're going to update more regularly. Have the conversation with the family, who wants what, right? And then you get to decide who gets what, and you can avoid a fight about who gets the item, because you can say, this is what I want. I think if the executor shows up and say, here's a 3-page letter of wishes about all the household items, that's likely not going to be a case where the kids are fighting about who gets what. They're just going to follow the 3 pages of instructions. But if that letter doesn't exist, oh, mom always wanted me to have that. Dad said this, and okay, then how do you resolve that other than somebody feeling hurt? Or it's just, it can affect the sibling relationship in the context of we're thinking of passing of mom or dad.
And I like in wills when there's a mechanism to handle disputes, either in the will or the letter of wishes, stating that if there is a dispute, this is how it's supposed to be handled, because that can alleviate some issues before it goes to court. And that I find is successful in many cases.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting wills drafted on there. You got to pull the short straw. Who gets the short straw? Or
Yes, yeah.
I read one the other day that talked about, you get a brand new deck of cards and everybody has to pull, and then there was this ranking of order based on the rules of poker as to who went first. And I thought, that's pretty creative, but no one's going to argue it. It's right there in the will. And
Right.
They took the time to lay it all out. So that told me, yeah, that was good. If those rules exist either in the will or outside the will, that's less likely to blow up and have a fight, because mom and dad have thought about it. Yeah. So there's some good examples out there. Get creative on the best way of solving it for your family.
Thank you, Gord. I think those are great final comments for our listeners today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please feel free to subscribe on wherever you listen to podcasts, and visit us on YouTube as well. We're everywhere, right, Gord?
We are. You can consume the content any which way you want, but hopefully that's helpful. And we appreciate your feedback and your support of the channel.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Bye now.